"Get your filthy hands off that chessboard." Her voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. Isabella Grant, billionaire investor and self-proclaimed genius, glared across the room at the waiter who had just set down her glass of champagne. 200 of Manhattan's elite turned to stare. All eyes fixed on him. Daniel Hayes, quiet, composed, dressed in a black uniform that hid a story no one cared to know. "You think someone like you belongs near a game for minds that matter?" Her words dripped with arrogance, her smile sharpened by privilege. Then she laughed. "Tell you what, beat me in chess and I'll marry you." The crowd erupted in laughter. Mockery filled the air, their amusement echoing off marble walls. To them it was a joke, a moment of cruelty disguised as entertainment. But what no one knew was that the man they were laughing at once carried the title of National Junior Champion. The same hands that served wine once moved pieces with the precision of a grandmaster. And tonight, those hands were about to remind everyone that brilliance doesn't need a title, and genius doesn't ask permission. She said it to humiliate him. He'd make her regret every word. Daniel Hayes wasn't born to serve cocktails to people who barely noticed his name tag. Once, he was the kind of kid who saw the world in moves and counter-moves. A chess prodigy whose mind worked 3 steps ahead of anyone in the room. At 17, he earned a full scholarship to the National Chess Academy. At 18, his father collapsed on a construction site. By 19, Daniel was working double shifts to keep his family alive. The boards he studied changed from chessboards to restaurant tables, the applause of tournaments replaced by the clatter of empty glasses. Still, late at night, when the city went quiet, he'd pull out a small wooden chess piece, a king carved by his grandfather, and stare at it until sleep took him. That was his only reminder of the life he'd buried. He moved through luxury like a ghost, serving those who never saw him. But under the calm of his silence, his mind never stopped calculating, never stopped seeing patterns, never stopped remembering. When Isabella Grant mocked him that night, it wasn't just arrogance that stung. It was a reminder of every opportunity ripped away, every door that had been slammed because of who he was and where he came from. And as he cleared the last table, the challenge echoed in his head. "Beat me in chess and I'll marry you." To her it was a joke. To him it was a spark, the kind that wakes something sleeping deep inside. The next morning, Daniel rode the early subway through the grey light of dawn. Around him, tired faces stared into nothing, but his mind was miles away, replaying her words again and again. "Beat me in chess, and I'll marry you." He tried to laugh it off. But humiliation has a way of staying lodged in your chest. Still, there was something else underneath the anger, a quiet pulse of defiance. When he got home, his sister Maya was already awake, studying at the kitchen table. Their apartment was small, worn, but filled with determination. "Columbia emailed me again," she said softly. "They want a chess video for the scholarship submission." Daniel froze. He'd taught her everything she knew about the game. But she needed a partner, someone to play against, someone strong enough to make her talent shine. He looked at the old chessboard between them, the one they'd inherited from their grandfather. Its edges were chipped, the squares faded from years of use, but it still carried the weight of memory. "Maybe," he said quietly. "It's time I played again." That night, while the city slept, Daniel set up the pieces. Each move brought back the rhythm of who he used to be. Pawn to e4, knight to f3, bishop to c4. The board came alive under his hands, like it had been waiting for him all these years. By sunrise, the decision was made. He wasn't going to hide anymore. He wasn't going to let a billionaire's mockery define his worth. The next gala was only days away, and when Isabella Grant arrived, he'd be ready. Not as a waiter, but as a player. The night of the gala arrived like a storm in silk. Cameras flashed outside the Grand Meridian Club as black cars lined the entrance. Inside, the chandeliers glittered, champagne flowed, and Isabella Grant owned every glance in the room. She wore power like perfume, expensive, heavy, impossible to ignore. Her laughter filled the air as she entertained Manhattan's most powerful. Senators, CEOs, investors, each one orbiting her like stars around a sun made of arrogance. And there, in the corner of the ballroom, Daniel stood in his crisp waiter's uniform, invisible once again. He moved quietly between tables, refilling glasses, avoiding her gaze. But when his eyes landed on the stage, his breath caught. There it was. A handcrafted marble chessboard displayed at the center of the room, the same one from the night she'd humiliated him. The pieces gleamed under the golden light, untouched, waiting. Isabella's voice rang out across the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, raising her glass, "tonight we celebrate brilliance and the kind money can buy." Laughter rippled through the room. She placed her hand on the chessboard and smirked. "This little set is here as a reminder. Strategy isn't for everyone. Some of us are born to play the game, others to serve drinks at it." The room chuckled politely. Then her gaze shifted, straight to him. "Daniel," she called, her tone sharp and playful, "I've been staring at this board all night. Care to test your luck?" The crowd turned, a sea of diamonds, tuxedos, and cell phones ready to record. Her words hung in the air, cruel and glittering. "Beat me in chess and I'll marry you," she repeated, smiling for the cameras. "Listen and you'll clear every table in this room." The audience roared with laughter. Daniel stood still, not angry, not embarrassed, just calm. Finally he said, "You're on." The laughter stopped. Even Isabella blinked, surprised, because for the first time the waiter wasn't taking orders, he was taking control. They sat across from each other beneath the chandelier's golden light. The ballroom fell into a hush. Every phone in the room was raised, ready to capture what they thought would be a joke, a billionaire toying with her waiter. But Daniel's face was calm, almost serene. He studied the board the way a soldier studies a battlefield, patient, focused, unshakable. Isabella made the first move, her diamond bracelet flashing as she slid her pawn forward. "Try to keep up," she said with a smirk. Daniel's fingers rested lightly on the pieces. His movements were deliberate, steady. Pawn to e5, a mirror of her opening. The simplest of replies, and yet the beginning of a storm. Minutes passed. The clinking of glasses faded. The whispers turned into silence. Because something was happening. Each of Daniel's moves came faster, sharper. He was no longer reacting, he was leading. His eyes didn't wander. They calculated, anticipated, executed. Every shift of his hand carried the quiet precision of a man who'd lived a lifetime thinking 3 moves ahead. Isabella's confidence began to slip. Her laughter faltered. She leaned closer to the board, brow furrowing. He'd just taken her bishop, then her rook. "This is luck," she murmured, forcing a smile. Daniel said nothing. He just moved his queen with quiet certainty. "Check," the crowd murmured. No one laughed anymore. A tech investor whispered, "Wait, did he just trap her knight?" Another voice answered, "He's not just playing. He's teaching her." Beads of sweat glistened on Isabella's forehead. She reached for a piece, then froze. Her options were gone. Her king was cornered, surrounded by inevitability. Daniel's voice broke the silence, calm, measured, devastating. "Checkmate!" The ballroom erupted. Some gasped, some cheered, others just stared in disbelief. The waiter had beaten the billionaire. Not with power, not with wealth, but with brilliance. Daniel leaned back slightly, eyes steady. "You said you'd marry me if I beat you," he said quietly. "Tell me, Miss Grant, should I send the invitations?" For a long moment no one moved. The sound of the final word, "checkmate," still hung in the air like thunder that refused to fade. Isabella sat frozen, her painted smile cracking. Around her the room had shifted. The same people who once laughed at Daniel now looked at him with awe. The same cameras that recorded his humiliation were now streaming his triumph. One man whispered, "That wasn't luck." Another murmured, "He plays like a grandmaster." Daniel stood slowly, the quiet confidence of victory settling over him like a second skin. He wasn't gloating. He didn't need to. His calm was louder than any applause. Across the room, a well-dressed man in his 60s stepped forward, the president of the National Chess Federation. "I know that opening," he said softly, "and that endgame." "Who are you?" Daniel looked up. "Just a waiter who used to play," he said. The man smiled. "Not anymore." The crowd erupted into cheers. Phones flashed. Someone shouted, "Get him a contract." Another voice called, "Put him in the tournament." Isabella finally rose to her feet, trying to regain her composure. "Well," she said tightly, "it seems the help had a lucky night," but her words sounded small now, brittle, hollow. Daniel met her gaze evenly. "Luck," he said quietly, "is what people call skill when they can't explain it." The room broke into laughter and applause again, this time for him. Reporters pushed forward, snapping photos. The hashtag #DarkWaiter Grandmaster exploded online within minutes. Isabella's smile disappeared completely as the president of the Chess Federation took Daniel's hand. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "the world should see what you just did. I'd like to offer you a place in the national championship, if you'll accept." Daniel hesitated for a moment, glancing around the glittering room that had once made him feel so small. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think it's time people saw what's been invisible for too long." The applause rose again, louder, prouder, echoing through marble and crystal. And for the first time, Daniel Hayes wasn't a waiter in someone else's story. He was the one writing it. The story didn't end that night. It began. By morning, Daniel Hayes' name was everywhere. Clips of the match flooded social media. A waiter outthinking a billionaire in front of the world. Headlines called him the real-life King's Gambit. The hashtag #DarkWaiter Grandmaster hit 1 million views before sunrise. Journalists camped outside the Meridian Club, not for Isabella Grant, but for him. Reporters wanted interviews. Sponsors wanted partnerships. The Chess Federation confirmed his entry into the national championship. And somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief, Daniel realized his life had changed forever. Still, his first stop wasn't a TV studio or an interview. It was home. When he opened the apartment door, his sister Maya was crying, the good kind of tears. "You're everywhere," she said. "Columbia saw the video. They offered me a full scholarship. They said it's because of you." Their mother, frail but smiling from the couch, reached for his hand. "Your father would be proud," she whispered. Daniel knelt beside her, his voice quiet. "Maybe now," he said, "we can breathe again." But breathing would have to wait. A week later, he sat across from the nation's top-ranked player. Lights blazing, cameras rolling, the world watching. The board looked the same as it always had. 64 squares, black and white. But this time he wasn't the invisible man serving drinks in the background. He was the main event. Each move carried weight, years of sacrifice, nights of hunger, and every insult he'd ever swallowed. And when the final checkmate landed, the crowd didn't just cheer for victory. They cheered for vindication. That night Daniel stood on the podium, the gold medal heavy around his neck. He looked straight into the camera and said, "Talent doesn't come from money. It comes from hunger, the kind that never gives up." Somewhere in a mansion uptown, Isabella watched in silence, her reflection pale against the television screen. For the first time in her life, she understood. She hadn't lost a game of chess. She'd lost to the very thing money could never buy, character, and Daniel Hayes. He'd finally proven that brilliance isn't owned by the powerful. It's born in the overlooked. Months passed. The noise of fame faded, but the meaning of it didn't. Daniel Hayes was no longer a headline, he was a symbol. Invitations came from everywhere. Universities, talk shows, chess tournaments across the world. But he stayed grounded, still living in the same apartment, still visiting the youth center where he taught neighborhood kids how to play. He told them, "It's not about winning. It's about thinking for yourself when the world tells you not to." At the World Chess Open, his name appeared beside legends he once studied in silence. When he walked on stage, the crowd rose before he'd even made his first move. He carried the same wooden king his grandfather had carved, smooth from years of touch, and placed it beside the board. Across the world, people watched. And as the cameras zoomed in, Daniel smiled quietly. He wasn't playing for glory anymore. He was playing for everyone who'd ever been underestimated. His final match ended, as it always did, in checkmate. But the real victory was never on the board. It was in the lives that changed, because he'd refused to stay invisible. When the applause faded, he said softly, "Genius doesn't come with a title or a bank account. It comes from believing in yourself when no one else does." The crowd rose again. Not for a champion, but for a man who'd turned humiliation into hope. So the next time you see someone who looks ordinary, remember, every mind hides a masterpiece waiting for its chance to move. Every quiet soul could be planning the next checkmate, and sometimes the person serving your table might just be the smartest one in the room.